Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the Circle, whether you join at home, online, or whether you're here in South Edmonton in the spiritual home of Southminster Steinhauer United Church, where we are spiritual seekers, united in community. The circle of this community, however we connect to it, the circle gathers us. Whether we're seekers or dead certain, whether we're lighthearted or heavy-hearted, whether we're young or old or in between, we gather in this ancient configuration of a circle as though we're holding the rim with one another, creating a safe container for our joys and our sorrows, creating a safe space in the bustle of life, a place of sanctuary and a place of solace. Whether this day is for you a day of celebration, or whether this is a difficult day or a memory-laden day, you've chosen to take your place in spiritual community that we create together amid tragedies and triumphs, on smooth and difficult terrain, amid fear and courage, hostility and hospitality, disturbance and integrity. We seek to navigate our times together, finding strength and courage in the songs we'll sing, in the music that finds us, in the prayers we share, in the thoughts we explore with one another, in the stories we hear, in the music that finds us. We're indebted to the leadership of a retired colleague and a member of the Spiritual Gatherings team, our friend, Reverend Nel Ouwens, who will share with us today our time for all ages and our reflection. We each find ourselves on storied land, some of us on unceded territory, others in treaty lands, all of us in relationship with the ancestral lands of First Peoples. We honor the culture and the religion and the traditions and the medicines and the spiritualities of the Indigenous whose stories are woven into the land that migration or seeking refuge and sanctuary has led us or our ancestors to call home. And having learned the deep wounds of colonization, we begin this day seeking again to set our intention toward understanding, mutuality, and healing. As we light our candle here in this space of community, we invite those of you at home to light a candle as we light our candle as an act of hope, to burn a flame of intention, to honor the spark of wisdom wherever it shines, whether we find that in one another, in the witness of history, in teachers all around us in the natural world, in the treasures of stories, ancient and new, in the struggles for dignity and freedom, in the rituals of enduring tradition. So we light our candle as an act of hope, to hold to compassion, to hold to integrity, to hold to justice and love. And so we begin by singing our intentions with one another. we take this moment, as we do with each other each time we gather, to pray our intentions, to call ourselves into awareness for the ways we seek to live, for the ways we seek to open ourselves to our living. And so we pray with one another. We celebrate the moments of clarity in our lives, the aha of insight, the times of sensing the true north of our path, and the sighted moments of vision when we see our direction clearly. We also know what it is to be in the ambiguity of waiting, wondering, wandering in search of firm ground on which to place our next step. May we open to the wisdom of our ancestors, carrying community, instinct and intuition, and the teachers all around us as we navigate demanding terrain. May we grow more patient with ourselves and more kind to one another. May we discover the daily sacraments that anoint the most ordinary of days with grace. May it be so.
Sometimes things happen in our lives that we really don't like, or that we'd really rather not be a part of. But sometimes we don't have a lot of choice. We just have to live through things and move on. Today's story, In a Time for All Ages, is about a woman who lived through a flood, which is not a very nice thing, but she was able to move on in a good way. This is a prayer for the earth, the story of Nama, Noah's wife. In the time when the world was still young, plants and animals and people filled all creation. But the people were not always kind to one another, and they brought ruin to the garden called Earth. In Earth's garden, there lived a man named Noah and a woman named Nama. Noah and Nama were kind and loving and walked in Creator's ways. Creator said to Noah, "Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Build it 3 floors high with many rooms and cover it with pitch. Put a window in the ark for light. Do this quickly. Bring 2 of every animal that lives on this earth, birds and cattle and creeping things of every kind. Gather enough food for you and for them and store it in the ark." Then Creator called out to Nama, "Walk across the land and gather the seeds of all the flowers and all the trees. Take 2 of every kind of living plant and bring each one into the ark. They shall not be for food, but they shall be your garden, to tend and to keep. Work quickly, the rains begin tomorrow." Nama tied an apron of many pockets around her waist and walked through all the earth's fields and gardens. Her legs grew strong, and her feet were as the wings of birds. So she traveled far and never grew tired. Nama did as God commanded. She journeyed into the forest and carefully gathered the spores from the moss that made a carpet at her feet. She placed them in the cool, deep pockets of her apron, away from the light of the sun. She came upon the giant redwoods. They carried their cones too high for her hands to reach. Just then, a fierce howling sound blew through the forest. Branches trembled and the wind stirred the ground. The earth became dark with the dust. Nama grabbed hold of a tree trunk so she would not be swept away. Then, just as suddenly as the storm began, the wind grew calm, and there at Naama's feet were the cones of the redwoods. Naama picked acorns from the oak trees and nuts from the pecan and pistachio. The winged seeds of the maples snapped under the gentle pull of her hands. She carefully lifted the seedlings of the cedar and cypress, the persimmon and plum. She found every tree, from acacia to ziziphus. Naama walked into the fields right past the dandelions, pretending not to notice their feathery yellow heads sprouting over the grass. Naama, called Creator, gathers seeds of every living plant. Reluctantly, she placed the dandelion seeds in her pockets with all the others. Naama gathered the seeds of the sunflowers and buttercups, the orchids and jasmine. The fields blossomed with dahlias and daffodils, lilies and lavender. She picked 2 of every kind and planted them in red clay pots to carry onto the ark. She collected all the flowers, from the amaryllis to the zinnia. Tomatoes burst with the seed, and avocado pits rested in their green fruit. The fields were ripe with potatoes and pomegranates, oranges and okra, lima beans and lemons. Naama carried large straw baskets to hold all the varieties of fruits and vegetables, everything from apples to zucchini. When Naama had collected the seeds and seedlings of every living plant upon the earth, she brought them into the ark. In the center of the ark, she swept away some of the hay that covered the floor, and she made a space for all her plants. She carefully arranged them into groups and families. The garbanzos, peas, and soybeans belonged in the family of legumes. Among the herbs, she gathered oregano, rosemary, and thyme. Wheat, rice, and barley were in the family of grasses. The citruses boasted oranges, grapefruits, and tangerines. Among the family of lilies sprouted onions, chives, and tulips. Naama arranged every plant and seed, each in its special place on the ark. Then she made a sign that read, "Naama's garden. These plants are not for food." Then the sun disappeared. Lightning flashed and thunder boomed. Dark clouds filled the sky, and rain poured from the heavens until the waters covered all the green aspens and the green pines. Noah and Naama looked out over the waters and were sad for all that had been destroyed. For 40 days and 40 nights, the skies never brightened and the rains never ceased. On the ark, Noah and Naama cared for the lions and leopards, the porcupines and parrots, the opossums and orangutans. Some of the animals liked to eat in the day, and others wanted to eat at night. Just as the squirrels closed their eyes for the evening, the owls hooted for food. There were many sounds, as many as there were animals on the ark. The coyotes howled, the snakes hissed, and the peacock shrieked. The noise never stopped. Water was everywhere, but there was none for a bath. The smell of the animals filled the ark. Noah and Naama's problems worsened when the waters began to toss and turn, and the ark rocked from side to side. The animals were thrown about like a bunch of loose marbles. Their stomachs fluttered like the wings of 100 butterflies. Even the bright yellow mane of the lion turned green. At these times, Noah and Naama would breathe the sweet aroma of the flowers and sit in the quiet of the plants that they called Naama's garden. They prayed for the rains to stop. After 40 days and 40 nights, a rushing wind, rain ceased. The ark rested on the mountains of Ararat. When Naama and Noah looked out the window atop the ark, they saw the black sky soften into shades of blue. Noah decided to send a raven from the ark to scout for dry land. But the raven was not happy to leave the ark. "Why choose me as your messenger?" called the raven. "I gave you no more trouble than any of the other birds. Who knows what waits for me outside the ark? Perhaps it's cold or so hot that I'll die, and never more will there be ravens on the earth." Naamah held the raven in her hand and whispered to him, "Do not be afraid. Take this olive seed, and when you see even a small patch of dry land, let it fall to the earth." The raven felt comforted by Naamah's gentle words. When Noah sent him from the ark, he carried the olive seed in his beak. He flew back and forth until he finally dropped the olive seed on a tiny patch of land, barely visible above the water. Then he flew back to the ark. Then Noah sent out a dove to see if the waters had decreased. But the water still covered the earth, and the dove returned to the ark. After many days, Noah sent out the dove for a second time. Naamah whispered to the dove, "Bring us back an olive branch that has grown from the seed the raven has planted." And the dove flew over the waters, its wings casting a moving shadow over the seas. In a few days, the dove returned. Just as Naamah had hoped, the dove carried an olive branch in her beak. "Dry land," shouted Noah. "Creator has planted an olive tree for us." Naamah just smiled. The dove went out once again, and this time it did not return. Finally, the ground was dry and firm. 2 by 2, Noah led the animals from the ark. Some pranced, some flew, some slithered, and in this way they spread out over the earth. Naamah carefully placed all the seeds and seedlings in the deep pockets of her apron. As soon as she set foot on the new land, Naamah knelt down, put her hands into the soft, moist earth, and made small cradles in which to plant. She placed downy tufts of milkweed seeds in her palms and held them up to the sky to let the wind carry them in all directions. Naamah took off her sandals and let her feet sink into the soft soil. She sighed with delight at the touch of the land. Morning gave way to afternoon, and Naamah worked without rest. As she patted the earth around a small raspberry bush, a dark red berry fell generously into her hand. The taste of ripened raspberry refreshed her. Creator saw all that Naamah had planted and said, "Because of your great love for the earth, I will make you guardian of all living plants, and I will call you Imzirah, mother of seed." For a single moment, Naamah's eyes saw into the future, and from one end of the earth to the other. She saw how the seeds were carried great distances and how they landed softly on the soft ground. Dandelions were everywhere. Naamah delighted in how the trees grew tall and spread umbrellas of shade over the earth. Flowers sprinkled colors of yellow and peach and lilac over the fields. Naamah was pleased to be surrounded by all the living plants, even the dandelions. She lay down in a grassy meadow, and with each deep breath, she smelled lilies, lavender, and mint. A gentle wind blew through the grasses, and it sounded as if the meadow was whispering a prayer. Naamah slept in the quiet of growing things. To this day, whenever someone digs in the earth and plants a seed, Creator remembers the mother of seed, and Naamah's garden continues to grow.
Hello, I'm Allison. I have a wild moment for you this morning. This is a classic study in ecotherapy, ecopsychology. So they sent folks on a walk, some people on a city walk, some people on a forest walk. So they kind of accounted for the benefits of exercise. And they found that the people who did the forest walk had such wonderful wellness benefits, even just after 20 minutes. So if you were outside, walking even very slowly, you would feel your heart rate go down, your cortisol, your stress hormone levels go down, and your blood pressure go down. So what I love about that is you don't have to do anything. You don't have to be exercising, you don't have to be trying. You just have to be out there for 20 minutes and you'll receive it without doing anything at all, just letting it happen. So let's see if we can feel a little bit of those benefits just by even imagining it. If you want to, you could imagine a place that you love to go on a walk, or that you would love to walk, a place that you love to walk. And if you want to tap your toes back and forth like you're walking, you could. So why don't you imagine this special place to you in your favorite season? So what does it look like in that spot, in that season, and the best time of day for you to be there? Maybe smell the air. What does it smell like at that time of year? What are the colors? Are there any animals about? And what are they up to? Walking slowly through this place, you can look at the sky and the ground under your feet.
Today's reading is a short poem by Carrie Newcomer. Carrie is an American Quaker singer-songwriter and author who works with spiritual, philosophical, and humanitarian ideas. And she has done collaborative work with Parker Palmer and also with Jim Wallace. And those may be names that you're familiar with. Carrie writes about a time when she was dealing with a challenge learning mathematics and how she was able to live through it and learn things about moving on. This is her poem. Addition. My father taught me about numbers, how to carry forward what had grown too large for its column, add the 5 to the 7, carry forward the 10, leaving only a 2. It's like that, taking all you've come through, combining everything gathered and lost, add to the sum a little kindness for doing the best you could with what you knew at the time. Tally up all the 5s and 7s, all the 6s and 4s, all that came up odd or even. Then carry forward your expanded self, which has grown beyond the limits of the first container. It seems to me that we all have a worldview. We all have a collection of attitudes and values and stories and expectations about the world around us, which inform our every thought and action. We express that in our ethics and religion and philosophy and scientific beliefs and so on. It also seems to me that when there's too much drama in our world, too much excitement or too much emotion, or an unexpected series of events, it's then that our worldview runs into trouble. Instead of understanding our historical narrative and having known mentors and guides or spiritual leaders with us, and relating to a sense of values and connecting to a community, we come into times of conflict and chaos. We lose the stability of our worldview. We come to question how we're going to live through this, how we're going to move on. And of course, we're not the only people to ever think this, or to ever have our worldview destabilized. It's happened again and again throughout the history of the world, and it will happen again and again in the future. Let me trace a little of this story for you. In March of 2020, when the global COVID pandemic was declared and the world as we knew it shut down, we all found ourselves in a place of great uncertainty. From one day to the next, or so it seemed, our lives and those of everyone on the planet were threatened by a rogue virus, and the security of most of the systems that we consciously or unconsciously relied on to live through our lives on a day-to-day basis and to move on, that security was at least temporarily gone. Healthcare, education, transportation, administration of our communities, employment, Food security, housing, entertainment, everything was affected. We all scrambled to access our coping skills and adjust as best we could, never realizing at the beginning how long we would have to be continually coping and readjusting. There have been many deaths from the COVID pandemic, and many casualties in other ways, socially and economically. And then, in addition, conflict in the world escalated dramatically. Coping and living in this new world has taken many forms. And one of the things that my partner and I did early on in the pandemic was to begin walking. Every day we walked outside. And very quickly, the daily walking morphed into what has become known as the virtual Camino. Now, Camino is a pilgrimage walk, which has the physical benefits of walking, but also the spiritual benefits of walking with a purpose and connecting to those who have walked the Camino before you, and become a part of the Camino itself, becoming a part of an age-old spiritual quest, which often has as a result a change in worldview. And so we began walking on the Camino Frances, which begins in France and ends up at the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela in Spain. And this Camino has existed for over 1,000 years. Along with tracking our mileage of roughly 5 kilometers a day, we began to research, to watch videos of others who had walked the actual Camino that we were walking virtually, and to read the history of the Camino, and the peoples and the countries and the conquests and the chaos that were associated historically with the Camino. And front and center, in so many of these historical European conquests, were faith-based issues in the 3 Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Land use and ownership, community structure, military conflict, distribution of wealth, architecture and building programs, religious jurisdiction, economic and food security, you name it. So much of what Spain was and what it became was tied to the story of the people's religions. Over the years, all kinds of transformations and shifting occurred, and perspective changed, and lots of conflict and chaos happened, and always, some of the people managed to live through and move on. After the conflict and chaos, people would reconnect with the community. They would begin again to live out of a sense of values. Mentors and guides and spiritual leaders would arise. The historical narrative would continue, and life would go on with a reset worldview. After the Camino Frances, we took a Canadian break by virtually hiking the Skyline Trail, which is a backpacking trek in the Canadian Rockies by Jasper in Alberta. Now, the videos of the Skyline Trail did not seem to have the more traditional historical and faith-based connections of the European Caminos. But the Skyline Trail certainly connected to what we're learning here at SSUC through the work of Allison and Zoe of Wild Sanctuary about the spiritual value of connecting to the natural world. Religious chaos and conquests have a way of influencing history and leaving remnant peoples to live through what's happened and to move on. And the natural world does the same sort of thing in the way that it changes in reaction to forces that act on it. And then the remnants of life that have lived through the chaos move on to change again in other ways. After leaving the Canadian Rocky Mountains, we chose another mountain range. We moved on to the Andes in South America and the virtual Camino of the Inca Trail in Peru, which terminates at the city of Machu Picchu. As with the other Caminos, we found that religion has much to do with the empire of the Inca people. The Incas believed that nature, humankind, and the earth lived in harmony and in perpetual interrelation. The state promoted worship of a creator god, the sun god, the moon goddess, the thunder god, the earth mother, and a host of other supernaturals. However, and as we saw again in other societies, religion was also an important tool for the ruling elite to legitimize their privileged position within the society and to spread the general belief of Inca superiority over the subjects of their empire. And of course, the arrival of the Spaniards in South America and the ensuing conflicts and chaos introduced a whole new historical narrative and a changed worldview. Next, we moved to Japan, and there we started the Shikoku Henru pilgrimage walk. Now, at 1,200 kilometers, Shikoku has been our longest virtual Camino to date. Watching videos of others who walked the Shikoku Henru and to read about the history of this Camino and the peoples and the regions and the conquests that were associated historically with the Camino led us to a whole new world. In Japan, we were not talking about the Abrahamic religions, but about Buddhism. The Shikoku Henru walks between 88 temples, found at various distances apart around the perimeter of the island of Shikoku. This spiritual journey has been in existence for 1,200 years, and it's walked by pilgrims from Japan as well as from other countries. And again, we can wonder, how can this pilgrimage, so tied to Buddhism, continue to be a part of hundreds of years of history and changing worldview for the Japanese people? Our current virtual Camino is the Palestinian Heritage Trail, and this is a relatively newly developed pilgrimage walk which winds for 330 kilometers through the West Bank of Palestine. Now, this trail is new, but the history of the area is not. This part of the Middle East has been central to the Abrahamic religions since time immemorial. As we walked virtually in the hills around Hebron, moving north towards Jerusalem, I was struck by the harshness of the landscape we were seeing. And I wondered how much the area had changed over the years, both in terms of geography, but also in terms of conflict and chaos, and whether in its present form it would have been easily recognized by King David and the tribes of the Hebrew nomadic people who walked the same land many years ago in biblical times. And so I did a little research into the chaos and conflict that were a part of the worldview in those days. The book of the prophet Samuel and the first book of the kings of Israel in Hebrew scriptures tell the extensive biblical stories of King David. I'm only going to relate a little bit of it to give you a sense of the times of turmoil that people lived through in those days, just as people have lived through turmoil in Europe and South America and Japan, and just as they did and still do everywhere on the globe in different times and places. A lot of the drama around David's time took place in the areas of Hebron and Jerusalem. And that story starts with Samuel, David, and Saul. So the prophet Samuel initially anoints the shepherd boy David as king when the incumbent king Saul is still very much alive. And the 12 tribes of the Hebrew people had all fought their way into this land and established their territories, with some of them being adjacent to enemy tribes, so there was constant skirmishing. Then the prophet Samuel died, and King Saul died, and then we had a civil war situation, with David being the legitimate anointed king living in the south of the territory, which was called Judah, and Saul's remaining son, Ishbosheth, came to be the king in the northern territory called Israel. And there's a lot more to David's story, but I'll stop there. If you're interested, you'll find lots of biblical stories that are not dissimilar in terms of conflict and chaos and disruption of worldview to what we have been learning about the history of the European Caminos. Conflict and chaos disrupt community. disrupts values. It disrupts the support of mentors and guides and spiritual leaders, and it changes the historical narrative, destabilizing the worldview of a people. And then over time, all kinds of transformations and shifting happens, and perspectives change, and always there is death and life. After conquest and chaos, the immediate drama lessens. People begin again to connect to each other, to community, often over a shared sense of values. Mentors, guides, and spiritual leaders arise, and the historical narrative wends its way on in a changed form. Over time, when these things are reset, it is possible for a worldview to resettle, for people to live through and to move on. In the same way, all of us look to what we know about these things, to our worldviews. We have a history. We have mentors, spiritual guides, leaders. We have values. We have a connection to community, to life. And somehow, despite the ravages of historical conflict and conquest and chaos, despite the vagaries of life over the centuries, despite all of this, somehow, as most of the Hebrew tribes in the biblical time of King David did, as most of the peoples on the lands of the virtual communals that we walk did, as most of us living in this contemporary time of global pandemic and conflict and chaos are doing, we live through and we move on. May we move past chaos and conflict. May we connect to community. May we recognize our values. May we appreciate our mentors, guides, and spiritual leaders. May we understand that our historical narrative is ever-changing. And may these words rest in us.
As community, we are living in the midst of seeking to find our ways to go on. We live in the midst of those things that are places of need and places of want and places of despair and places of grief in our lives. And we hold with each other also those places of courage, those places of strength, those places where we have found what it takes to keep on keeping on. So we gather as community to sing our prayers with one another. We're going to pause after each verse that we sing and take time with each other in this circle to have the opportunity to name those things we want to hold with one another collectively. So we begin in our prayer song with the first verse, and then we'll pause to name those places of need, those places of hurt, those places of struggle, and then we'll sing again about our blessings and pause to name those, and then we'll sing again with one another. I want to invite us to come and name those places of fear or pain, those places of loss, those places where we are holding one another, seeking to hold the rim of our circle of community. Those places may be global, they may be social, they might be personal. And there is a microphone here so we can hear one another. If you'd like to come and name what we might hold collectively, I invite you to do that. And if not, I invite you to hold it in your heart as we hold it with you.
I like to think of my sister Anne, that she be surrounded by healing love of God. She's not doing very well, but I just see her surrounded by healing love.
As we bring our prayers for Anne, I invite us to offer the last two lines that Scott Kearns has given us, that we might speak those together as we hold this collectively. In these, our times of need, may love abound.
In times of gladness, when life brings happiness, seasons of pleasure, when work has brought success, we celebrate in our hearts. We join you in these abundant blessings. We share the joy.
I invite us to take a moment to name those joys that we celebrate this day and hold them collectively with one another. And so that we can hear one another, I invite you to use the microphone here at my left.
I'm just full of joy today. My mom has been in care now for several years, and my dad passed away just before that happened. Since Thanksgiving before COVID, we haven't had a chance for my brother to come and see Mom. And over the weekend, we had a surprise visit from my brother and some nephews and our kids, and it was just such a lovely gift for my mom, just to have time, just to be in the presence of all of her kids, and it just brought me so much joy.
We offer those last two lines of Scott's words as we acknowledge this joy and others. In these abundant blessings, we share the joy. Are there other joys we want to name collectively?
This is not necessarily personal, but I need a little joy today. On Friday, I live at the Devonshire, and on Friday they had drinks upstairs on the patio. So I ventured up there. I won't tell you what I had, but I couldn't help but feel the laughter and the joy and the happiness of old people being together, and how lovely it was to be part of that and see the smiles and hear the laughter. It was certainly something we all cherish after all the 2 years we've had. So, a great time for joy.
In these abundant blessings, we share the joy.
I'd just like to say it's just wonderful being at Labyrinth Lake and sharing the joy of many, many, many couples this summer that are excited about the gender reveal or the showers or the reunions that are happening. And I also think of my partner, Wilson, who's going to be going to Salt Spring Island for the next couple of months. And it's going to be a difficult journey for myself. But I know that we have a wonderful faith community and people here that understand those wonderful joys that we have in everyday life. Thank you.
In these abundant blessings, we share the joy.
Nope. I'm going to take this off because I'm not sure if I can reach this. In the last 3 weeks or so, we have been collecting underwear, and many, many of you have done that through your own purchases or gave me money to purchase. And it is an abundant blessing. The last time we did this in 2019, we collected over 500 pairs, and we hit fairly close to that last week, and then this week all the money I had, I went out on a tip from Gwen, who's a member of our congregation, and found a place offering women's underwear, 10 pairs for $16. So we purchased over 100 pairs. So now we're over what was our new goal of 600. So it is truly a blessing for us. For me personally, it was a way of saying that we're coming out of this crisis, because I know in the inner city they are still there and struggling to find ways to cope, and this is true of Bissell. So I just want to say that it was a blessing to me to be able to do this with your help. Thank you.
In these abundant blessings, we share the joy.
Just a quick joyful thing that's happening in the future. Next Sunday, there is a harp concert here. And then the following Friday, there's an outdoor concert by a local group called Harmonia. And they're a wind and string group, and they're going to Ireland to perform. So if the weather's nice, it'll be here on the Friday evening at 7:30. If the weather is inclement, like it has been recently, we will move to the indoors. So I hope you'll join them. It will be a gift of music, and we will be able to give donations to help them with their trip. Thank you.
Triumph, together we will
There will be an opportunity to be in conversation with Nel Ouwens and others following our gathering this morning. There is a link on our website for a Zoom connection, an opportunity to share together about this morning's theme and to have a little time face-to-face to talk with one another. So we invite you to take that opportunity if you're able to do that, those of you joining us at home or those of you that may be home shortly. And as Linda has reminded us, there's still a little time to drop our gaunch for the Bissell Center. Linda will be happy to receive either financial contributions or your donations today. And on Tuesday, our gifts will go down to the Bissell Center, and we celebrate that we have achieved our new goal of 600 pair, and we have an opportunity to succeed that in the next couple of days. And Linda has also mentioned to you about this concert coming up on the 15th, and also next Sunday, an opportunity to raise a bit of money and support a local artist as we gather for a concert here at 2 o'clock. By Christina Kant, a local harpist who is going to share the proceeds that you offer by your donations equally with the Bissell Center and our support of her. So we invite you to come back next Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock to share in that time of music together. Thank you for all the ways that you support us. There's a few opportunities to continue to support the garage sale out in the foyer this morning. There's a couple of tables inviting you to shop again. So all of those proceeds will be in support of in addition to the funds we've raised at the garage sale, which exceeded our wildest imaginations at over $12,500, and we're still counting. So we thank you for all the ways that you've supported us.
We've got the strength, we've got the courage to face today. We've got the strength, we've got the courage, come what may. Times of deep unrest, days when pain and jest, revive this true of love's abiding song. We've got the strength, we've got the courage to face today.
I want to just remind us of 2 opportunities this week to celebrate the light that has changed in the life of individuals who've been part of this community and families who are part of this community. We gather tomorrow to celebrate the light that shone in the life of Marion Seguin for 103 years. We gather tomorrow morning at 10:30 with her family to celebrate her long and remarkable life. And we gather with the Wharton family on Saturday, next Saturday, July the 9th at 2 p.m. to honor and celebrate the life of Paul Wharton, who died tragically in a car collision after a massive heart attack at the age of 54. So we gather this week with the Seguin family, tomorrow with the Wharton family on Saturday to share our support, our gratitude for lives lived, and to learn their legacy. And we take the light that is within us, between us, and beyond us. We take it as we go on, moving through all that life brings, growing brighter in gratitude, in hope, and in courage, taking the time we've shared and the gifts of this collective experience with us into whatever this week holds in each of our lives. May we go in strength and courage, with grace and compassion.